Mr. Herizal Hazri, Chief Executive of the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS Malaysia. Ms. Ann Hong, representative of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, TECO in Malaysia. Dr. Charles Chu, Acting Secretary General of the Chinese Taipei Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, CTPECC. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kelvin Chang, analyst in the Economics Division in ISIS Malaysia, and I'll be the MC for this morning's proceedings. To kick things off, may I please have the honor of inviting Mr. Herizal Hazri, Chief Executive of ISIS Malaysia, to deliver the welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Kelvin. Madam Ann Hong, representative of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Malaysia, TECO, Dr. Charles Chow, Secretary General of the Chinese Taipei Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, CTPECC, Excellencies, learned speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Selamat pagi and good morning from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. To those who joined us for the first webinar that we hosted with CTPECC last week, welcome back. For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. And either way, thank you for joining us today. This week's topic of discussion is on exploring avenues of growth for Malaysia and Taiwan post-pandemic, strengthening regional cooperation. This builds on the conversation we had last week that focused on the impacts of the pandemic in both Taiwan and Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, this conversation on post-pandemic growth is timely for both countries. As Malaysia and Taiwan are rolling out our respective vaccination programs, both countries hope that this will set us back on track towards economic growth and prosperity. However, against this optimistic backdrop, it is very important for us to remember that we need to strategize and think how we can not only rebuild, but rebuild better following the damage caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. In rebuilding better, and if there is one thing that the global pandemic has taught us, it is we cannot do it alone. The early days of the pandemic last year saw some countries implementing export restrictions on key items and the hoarding of other essential goods. While this in some ways gave a sense of security, or false security I would say, to some of these countries, it had unfortunately affected negatively other countries, and this has made them unable to respond to the pandemic in a better way. This highlights the problem of us thinking about ourselves more rather than the collective. This is why today's discussion is of importance. With the economic outlook of 2021 set to be better than last year, we need not to think only to identify our strengths and opportunities for growth, but also to think how we can strengthen regional cooperation. Today, we are gathering the learned experts from Malaysia and Taiwan. It is my hope that we can do this to look forward to the end of the pandemic and the public health, as well as jointly think on how we can strategize and work together, send messages, as well as design programs and strategic approaches for our governments, so we can work together towards a more sustainable growth. It is important, ladies and gentlemen, that we learn from this pandemic. This is our opportunity to work better, to find new ways, and to cherish instead of doing the opposite, which what we have actually been doing before. In concluding my remarks this morning, I would like to thank Dr. Charles Chu and CTPECC for being such helpful co-hosts, and Madam Ann Hong and TECO from Malaysia for their support. I sincerely hope that we will have a fruitful and productive discussion this morning. Thank you. Back to you, Kelvin.
Thank you, Mr. Herzl, for the welcoming remarks. May I now please have the honor of inviting Ms. Ann Hung, representative of TAIPEI in Malaysia, to deliver her opening remarks.
Thank you. Chief Executive Mr. Herizal of Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia, Dr. Charles Shou, Secretary of the Chinese Taipei Economic Council Corporation, distinguished speakers, friends from Malaysia and Taiwan, good morning, selamat pagi, 大家早. It's my great pleasure to join our partners, ISIS Malaysia and CTPECC, again to kick off a second webinar. Thank you, Mr. Herizal, Dr. Chiu, and your teams for working together to make the series webinar possible. And I would also like to thank our distinguished speakers joining us today from Taiwan. We are happy to have Ms. Dr. Wenjian Shi, Professor of Law, Department of International Business, National Zhengzhi University, and Ms. Melody Chen, Assistant Research Fellow, Taiwan Institute of Economic Research, and here in Malaysia, Dr. Juwita Mohammed, Fellow of Economics, Trade, and National Integration, ISIS Malaysia. I am very delighted that our first webinar on 28th of April on economic impacts of COVID-19 and stimulus packages introduced in Taiwan and Malaysia was successful and fruitful. And I was particularly impressed with one of the conclusions that mutually beneficial collaborations between Taiwan and Malaysia should be enhanced for economic recovery, especially in areas such as SMEs or national intellectual capital, and sustainable development, cybersecurity, health infrastructure, future energy, entrepreneurship, knowledge transfer, etc. And in today's session on exploring the avenues of growth for Taiwan and Malaysia, our speakers will discuss some of the emerging business trends in the post-COVID-19 world, including sustainable low-carbon growth, digital health, and digital economy, and how multilateral mechanisms such as CPTPP and APEC can help promote the development in related sectors through cooperation. And just as Mr. Herzl just mentioned, in the past year, the world has learned that no country can sustain alone without collaborating with one another. And it is more important than ever that countries in the region should work together to pursue economic revitalization in the post-pandemic era. And I'd like to stress that Taiwan and Malaysia are both trade-oriented economies that are open to and supportive of regional economic integration. While Malaysia is yet to ratify the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, I'd like to take this opportunity to add that Taiwan has expressed its strong interest and is ready to enter the second round of negotiation to become a new member of CPTPP. Let me explain why. Taiwan has close trade and investment relations with members of the CPTPP. For example, while 30% of Taiwan's imports come from its members, 20% of Taiwan's exports also go to the members. And 30% of Taiwan's total FDI came from CPTPP members, while more than half of its investment went to the members. And on that bilateral front, Taiwan and Malaysia share multiple economic and commercial interests. Over the past decades, Taiwan has been one of Malaysia's major trading partners. Last year, for example, Taiwan was the 5th largest trading partner of Malaysia, while Malaysia is Taiwan's 7th largest. Taiwan is also a significant investor in Malaysia with accumulated investment amount reaching 13.8 billion US dollars up to date. And a recent research report indicates that given Taiwan's niche participation in global high-tech industries and long-term trade and investment relationship with Malaysia, if Taiwan joins CPTPP, the potential benefits to Malaysia would increase substantially. So we hope that Malaysia will support our bid, especially after it ratifies the trade pact. So in closing, I want to thank ISIS, Malaysia, and CTPECC once again for your efforts, and thank you all for joining today's event. And I wish the webinar every success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ann. I now have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Charles Chu, Secretary General of CTPECC, to deliver his opening remarks.
Chief Executive of ISIS Malaysia, Mr. Herizal Hazri, representative of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Malaysia, Madam Ann Hong, moderator, Mr. Terence Tu, co-moderator, Mr. Haris Zainul, respectable presenters, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm so glad to be in the second event of the serial webinars working with the ISIS Malaysia. During the event last week, just like what has been mentioned in the remarks before me, we had a meaningful exchange on the experience of adapting to the impact of the pandemic. Today, we probe into the potential of growth after the pandemic. Crisis or shocks surely damage what we have today. However, they imply we have opportunities to come back in a new and more robust way if we proactively transform our policies or business models. The key is to innovatively change the way we used to think and do. The pandemic brings a golden chance to rebuild our economies into a green and sustainable pattern, given the existing one is gravely challenged by the virus. The new US administration has stressed the cruciality of the global agenda to address climate change issues, which means that more opportunity for growth will emerge in a post-pandemic era if we can seize them. At the same time, the digital economy can grow even faster when the age of contactless economy arrives after the pandemic. We will produce, consume, and get healthier than ever, taking advantage of digital technologies and the business models associated with them. I see a bright prospect for cooperation between Malaysia and Taiwan in this issue area. I'm proud that today we have the real experts and the most enthusiastic audience with us. It's anticipated the webinar will be another story of success for collaboration between the two institutes. The CTPECC is honored to be part of it, and we expect more to come after the event. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. Before we begin today's webinar, may I please request Mr. Herizal, Ms. Ann, Dr. Charles, and all of our distinguished speakers for today to switch on their cameras for a group photo session. Thank you everyone for your kind cooperation. 1, 2, 3. Okay. With that out of the way, may I please pass the floor to Mr. Terence Tu, the moderator of today's webinar titled Exploring Avenues of Growth for Malaysia and Taipei Post-Pandemic, Strengthening Regional Cooperation. Mr. Terence?
Right. Thank you, Kelvin. Ms. Ann Hong, Representative TECO, Mr. Herizal Hazri, Chief Executive, ISIS Malaysia, Mr. Charles Cho, SecGen of CTPECC, distinguished guests and participants. It's my pleasure to co-moderate the next sessions with Mr. Herizal. And let me just lay down just a few ground rules on the presentations that we're going to have. So each presentation will take about 15 minutes. And to the panelists, I will signal towards the end of your time, just to give you a quick heads up. And then after the presentations, we'll have Q&A that will be moderated by Mr. Herizal. And in the Q&A, we encourage participants to use the Q&A window and to type in your questions there, where other participants who may also share your same questions or want to add to them may then also input there. We will also try to accommodate the raise hand function if that is possible, but we encourage everyone to try and use the Q&A and type it in there. And Mr. Harris will carry out this session and maybe give a bit more explanation then. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Wen Chen Shi, who is Professor of Law at the Department of International Business, National Cheng Chi University. Her areas of specialty include international economic and trade law, as well as international environmental law. Aside from teaching, Dr. Shi also serves as a legal consultant on international trade law and international environmental law issues for Taiwan's Bureau of Foreign Trade, Ministry of Economic Affairs, Forestry Bureau, Council of Agriculture, and Environmental Protection Administration. Dr. Shi will be talking about the implication of participating in CPTPP for Taiwan's sustainable low carbon growth. Dr. Shi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, distinguished moderator. Good morning, Mr. Hazri, Madam Huang, and all the distinguished moderators and co-moderators and our fellow speakers. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Wen Chen Shi. I'm from Department of International Business, National Cheng Chi University. I noticed that most of our speakers are economists, but I am actually with a law background. And since all economists probably hate lawyers, and not everybody hates lawyers, so my function here is to unite all the speakers so that you have a target, when you are discussing crucial topics. As Mr. Hazri said, we have to, after the pandemic, we have to rebuild better. And I would add that I hope that we could also rebuild greener. That is the reason I choose the topic of the implication of participating in CPTPP for Taiwan's sustainable low carbon growth. And I also believe that it would also be a crucial policy goal for Malaysia as well. So in order to give a brief analysis on this topic, I would firstly lay out two background knowledge on, for example, firstly, the new generation FTA and environmental chapter in CPTPP with a focus on climate change related issues. And the second background information is to give you an overview on Taiwan's national policies and legal framework to support a sustainable low carbon growth. After having these two background knowledge, then I will present a brief summary on how CPTPP membership can help Taiwan to pursue this goal. When we say new generation FTA, it refers to a trade agreement which contains, in addition to the classical provisions on the reduction of customs duties and other NTB to trading goods and services, it also contains provisions on various matters related to trade, such as intellectual property protection, investment, public procurement, competition, and sustainable development. This is a definition from the European Court of Justice. For CPTPP, in the preamble of the CPTPP, we can see that the parties to this agreement, in addition to having this agreement reduce trade and investment barriers, also recognize that the parties has the right to regulate and to protect legitimate public welfare, such as the environment and conservation of living or non-living exhaustible natural resources. And also it allows the parties to promote a high level of environmental protection and to further the aim of sustainable development. While the preamble of any treaty is a very useful context when disputes arises and treaty provisions will have to be interpreted by the judges. If we look at the environmental chapters of CPTPP, we have chapter 20 that entitled Environment. And within this particular chapter, we have several provisions that would guide parties to cooperate in various areas on trade and environment issues. One particular article has the title of Transition to a Low Emissions and Resilient Economies. Well, actually, when the TPP was launched amongst a group of countries, New Zealand and Peru have actually pushed to have climate change in this TPP text. But the US proposed to remove the term climate change in 2014 and substituted with the low emission economy in the final version. And the US also removed any reference to the UNFCCC in the final TPP text. In the current version of Article 20.15 on transition to a low emissions and resilient economy, climate change was not mentioned, but it actually emphasized that considering CPTPP are consisting of both developing and developed economies, so they recognize that each parties have their own transition that reflect domestic circumstances and capabilities. And it sets out several areas of international cooperation, such as energy efficiency, development of cost-effective low emissions technology and alternative, and clean and renewable energy resources. And in pursuing these policy goals, market and non-market mechanisms are included as possible areas of cooperation. Having had a brief understanding on environmental chapters of CPTPP, I will bring you a brief overview on Taiwan's national policy and legal framework to support a sustainable low carbon growth. Well, in this sense, it is actually an interlinkage amongst a wide range of policy area, including but not limited to environmental protection, sustainable development, climate change mitigation, renewable energy and circular economy, etc. For example, we have a basic environmental act where the government is mandated to establish plans to gradually achieve the goal of becoming a nuclear-free country. So this is one of the main policy objectives of our government. And also in our Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act, we have a legally binding climate change mitigation objective as having a long-term national greenhouse gas emission reduction goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to no more than 50% of the baseline year 2005 by the year 2050. And we also have a Renewable Energy Development Act where the government is laying down various incentives to promote renewable energy, such as a feed-in tariff scheme. And Taiwan is in the process of actively develop and deploy renewable energy, such as solar and offshore wind. And we also have a policy framework for sustainable development. If we look at another Asian countries, for example, South Korea has a framework act on low carbon and green growth, but in Taiwan we do not have such a like an overarching legal framework for pursuing sustainable low carbon growth. In addition to these basic legal instruments, we do have other policy areas. For example, we have a strategic framework for sustainable energy policy, where the government is setting down not legally binding, but advisory target for improving energy efficiency and the use of renewable energy. The current policy, well, the current goal the government tries to achieve is to generate 20% of its electricity through renewable energy. This is like a major policy commitment that the government is trying to achieve in the next few years. And other supporting policy include, for example, Electricity Act. In this act, it mandates the government that the electric power shall have an electricity, what we call a carbon emission factor, that meets the electricity carbon emission factor criteria, which is promulgated by our Energy Bureau every year, so that the energy composition from our electricity supply can be geared toward a more renewable energy source. Other supporting policies include Green Finance Action Plan. Taiwan is in the process of developing a sustainable taxonomy following the EU footstep. And then we have an action plan for circular economy because as a campaign pledge transforming to a policy area, the current president tries to promote what we call a industrial innovative policy where green energy and circular economy are two important and important policy tools. And in addition to these, like mainly sustainable and climate change environment-related laws and policies, the role of trade policies and agreements also play an important part in Taiwan's promotion of sustainable low-carbon growth. So, for example, if we can have a trade agreement that help to reduce what we call climate-friendly goods and technologies, and these are not only referring to renewable energy, it could refer to a larger scale of goods and policies such as biofuel. So if we can have, or if we can become a parties to a trade agreement that helps to reduce climate-friendly goods and technologies, it would, for example, on the one hand, it would have our government to, or domestic players to have available and more affordable climate change goods and policies from our partner countries. At the same time, if we can build a strong domestic industries, we can also have overseas market assets from our like climate-friendly industry. And also the trade agreement should protect domestic policy space and the right to regulate. The last bit is that the trade agreement can also establish an institutional framework for a forum of discussion on areas of cooperation. Not to mention that when disputes arise, a trade agreement should have an appropriate and effective dispute resolution mechanism. So that's basically the Taiwan policy and legal framework for sustainable and low carbon growth. Coming to the last point, can CPP membership help? Well, at the very beginning, I have already given an overview on environmental chapters of CPTPP, so it looks like a new FTA in the sense. But actually, in comparison to other current relevant FTAs, for example, we have an agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability that was launched by one of the CPTPP member, New Zealand, in 2019. From the name of this agreement, it focused on actually both climate change and trade. And the policy goal of such a new agreement is, for example, to reduce tariff and non-tariff barriers to environmental goods, and a new and binding commitment for environmental services. And also they are working out discipline on elimination of fossil fuel subsidies. So this agreement is like, we can call it a pure new FTA. On the other hand, the FTA that is signed with EU and several Southeast Asian countries have already signed an FTA with EU. Those that are concluded after 2010 are containing a specific chapter on trade and sustainable development. And within the chapter, they will have a particular article on climate change. And even, for example, when the EU has a FTA with Singapore, there is a specific chapter on the non-tariff barriers to trade and investment in renewable energy generation. So we can say that for FTAs that are signed with EU after 2010, they can be called a new FTA. In comparison, CPTPP is only a relatively new FTA in the sense that climate change is not specifically mentioned, and the areas of cooperation are probably not as comprehensive as the previous two types of FTA I've mentioned. But despite that, Yes. Despite that, I believe that CPTPP membership can support Taiwan's sustainable low carbon growth in the sense that there are several areas of tariff barriers that exist between the current climate change, what we call climate change friendly goods and services. If the tariff reduction commitments can help to reduce such type of trade barriers, I believe the membership for Taiwan is crucial in that particular aspect. And from the environmental chapter that we've seen previously, the CPTPP environmental chapter do provide an institutional framework for parties to discuss international cooperation in areas of renewable energy, for example. So the CPTPP membership do help Taiwan to support a low carbon energy growth. What about when Malaysia ratify the CPTPP and if Taiwan can become a CPTPP member? The relationship between Malaysia and Taiwan are actually quite robust, considering the fact that the two countries do not have an FTA between themselves. And for example, Malaysia in its national determined contribution that was submitted in the Paris Agreement has a long-term greenhouse gas mitigation targets of reducing greenhouse gas emission intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030, relative to the emission intensity of GDP in 2005. So I believe that both countries are pursuing the path of a sustainable low carbon area, and there are complementarity and potential cooperation between both countries in, for example, renewable energy development. Taiwan is helping building a strong offshore wind industry, and Malaysia has a very strong biofuel industries in the sense of renewable energy source. So under the CPTPP framework, probably the two countries can together rebuild a better and a greener economies after the pandemic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Shi, for a very information-packed presentation. I won't try to make a full summary, but definitely very important points in terms of low carbon growth, environmental protection, renewable energy, green economy, circular economy. And definitely, with the threat, I guess I can say, of climate change and global warming, it's especially important to have international cooperation, not just among governments, but also greater alignment and direction of businesses and regulation in this area, as undoubtedly we will all be affected, not just in terms of trade and business, but in terms of social cohesion, land use, and etc. Now, if I may introduce our next speaker, Ms. Melody Chen. Ms. Melody Chen is Assistant Research Fellow at the Department of International Affairs, Taiwan Institute of Economic Research. Her research areas include health policy, trade and health, and issues impacting health in Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation region. She is currently a PhD candidate at the Institute of Health Policy and Management, National Taiwan University, and holds a master's degree from the Department of Public Health, Taipei Medical University. She has written extensively on the pandemic and health cooperation, and her most recent project is with the Ministry of Health and Welfare to enhance public participation in APEC health-related programs. Ms. Chen will be presenting on the development of digital health in APEC. Ms. Chen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, distinguished moderator, Ms. Tu, distinguished co-moderator, and distinguished speakers. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Melody Chen from CTPECC. And we are also APEC Study Center in Taiwan. So I would like to talk about the development of digital health in APEC's perspective. And I would prefer to use the slides for all the audience to catch the contents easier. Okay, next. Regarding the digital related issues in APEC, you will have noticed important initiative called APEC Initiative of Cooperation to Promote Internet Economy, which is also called EIDER. This initiative.
Sorry, Ms. Chen. The slides are not on.
Oh, it's not
Can
on.
you double check if your screen is shared? So at the bottom, you should see the share screen.
Yes.
Click on the share screen.
We are not sharing the screen now, but you
Oh.
can see us.
No, we can see you, but I cannot see the slides.
Oh, you can see the slide.
Okay.
Sorry, I can see the slides, but it's not on full screen.
Yeah, same here. I can see the slides as well, but it's not on full screen.
Interestingly, I can see the slides on full screen. So sorry to make this complicated, but I should just say.
So
I.
what about we just carry on, because some of the audience can see the full screen with the PowerPoint, and some cannot. What about we just carry on?
Sure,
to set the time something? Yeah.
Yeah, let's carry on and see if we can fix this in the background. Please, Ms. Chen.
Okay, so back to the IDER. IDER was formally recognized by the APEC leaders in 2014 that its role of promoting innovative development and increasing economic participation. APEC leaders instructed ministers and officials to discuss the internet economy to further in the 11 areas to promote member economies cooperation, to exchange to discuss the internet economy further in the 11 areas to promote member economies cooperation, developing the internet economy and facilitate technological and policy exchanges to bridge the digital divide in the region. And currently, the Digital Economy Steering Group leads the discussion of digital-related issues and directly report to the senior officials in APEC. Next. However, APEC has noticed digital health area since 2020, the year Malaysia hosted APEC. For hosting the APEC in 2020, Malaysia set the main theme and 3 priorities for attaining its goal in APEC. The second priority was to enhance inclusive economic participation through digital economy and technology, which also emphasized how to improve elderly's life by digital technologies. And it's the first time the APEC mentioned the digital health-related issues in its annual priorities. It is important that Malaysia put the element of digital or digital health in its 2020 priorities. According to the outcomes of APEC in 2020, Malaysia addressed the APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040, which will guide the development of APEC in future 20 years. And digital-related issues will be discussed comprehensively. Next. As we know that COVID-19 pandemic has seriously affected our lives since last year, the pandemic has created an urgent need for coordinated mechanisms to respond to the outbreak across health sectors. And digital health solutions have been identified as promising approaches to address this challenge. Therefore, to address the pandemic in the Asia-Pacific region, the APEC Health Working Group, as the only health official international platform in the region, has declared its concern about the necessity of supporting the health needs of APEC member populations, promoting resilient health systems, and further strengthening rapid emergency response capacities in March last year. However, the pandemic has continually spread in the whole world. In August last year, the health ministers in APEC economies has jointly declared the statement, which indicated the important role that digital health should play moving forward. And the ministers also encouraged APEC economies to adopt digital solutions to strengthen supply chain resilience, harnessing the opportunities of digital economy. In addition, health ministers especially highlighted the leadership the APEC economies have demonstrated in using digital technology to respond to COVID-19. To ensure the outcomes of digital health in APEC, the APEC Health Working Group has initiated the North Star 2030 strategy for fostering health systems innovation, including the fields of telemedicine and digital health in the future 10 years. Next. Taiwan has contributed our efforts on digital health in APEC. Firstly, we initiated the establishment of the Digital Health Sub-Working Group during the first senior official meeting last year. The initiative was recognized by APEC Health Working Group's members and officially established in February 2020. We currently lead the sub-working group under the APEC Health Working Group. Secondly, our Health Minister Chen Shizhong was invited to share the digital measures we have adopted for combating COVID-19 in the APEC high-level meeting last August. The important digital measures we have taken, for example, the face mask management platform, which connect with the MediCloud system for implementing the real name system so that everyone can purchase face masks by showing their personal health insurance cards through physical and online systems. We conduct the first policy dialogue meeting on digital health for being as a platform for policy and private sectors in APEC region to share their digital measures on COVID-19 prevention and control. In the near future, we will also initiate an APEC project of APEC Digital Health Alliance for being a permanent platform for more digital health related cooperation among APEC economies. Next, I would like to share our new business opportunities caused by COVID-19 pandemic in Taiwan. The first case is Taiwan Social Distancing Aid. The purpose of this aid is to prevent COVID-19 transmission by tracking the distance between the app's user. Taiwan has taken strategies of blocking the virus out of the border, but we are facing a serious outbreak recently since the cluster infection in the hotel. The venues visited by confirmed cases almost includes whole Taiwan. Therefore, our government encouraged people to use this aid for detecting the personal social distance. This aid is introduced by Taiwan CDC and Taiwan AI Labs. The social distancing aid uses Bluetooth technology and alerts users if they are exposed to confirmed COVID-19 cases. This technology will detect and record the signal of Bluetooth text within a range of about 10 meters. The Bluetooth text will automatically change random numbers within 15 minutes. Users who have been in touch with the confirmed cases will be notified after pressing the report button. Next. The other case I would like to share is an online consultation platform called Asking, which has been launched by the Derm AI company and Taipei Medical University. Asking is a case for developing new type of telemedicine. Users can link the official account of Asking through the communication software line, and you can connect this. You can scan this QR code on the slide to add friend with the Asking. Then you can see the process. There are 4 steps. The steps 1 is reservation. Is to users can choose convenient time slots to make appointments with physicians. The page will tell you the consult time is about 15 minutes and price is about 30 US dollars. And you can choose which specialist. for example, dermatology or general physicians. And step 2 and step 3, you can see the page will ask you about skin conditions such as acne and moles, and you may have to upload the photos online for physicians' reference. And to step 4, physicians can proceed to provide advice on home care and medication, and the users will be able to purchase non-prescription drugs directly from neighboring pharmacies, which is simple and more convenient. In conclusion, I have 2 recommendations for the cooperation between Taiwan and Malaysia. First, we would like to invite Malaysia to participate in the APEC Digital Health Sub-Working Group. Currently, we have Thailand, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Peru as the members. Malaysia's participation will support the sub-working group to ensure the trend of digital health development in APEC. Secondly, we will initiate the APEC Digital Health Alliance project for applying APEC fund. We would also like to invite Malaysia as one of the co-sponsors of this project for jointly activating the dynamics of digital health actions in APEC. And this is my presentation today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chen, for a very interesting presentation as well. And definitely points brought up on supporting healthcare of the elderly, traditional technologies, remote and telemedicine, digital health. And certainly this is exciting if we can share knowledge and ways forward in cooperation in terms of these. And maybe especially for Malaysia in terms of telehealth and online consultations, as Malaysia does continue to have remote areas which such technologies can be usefully deployed. Now, let me, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here. Yes, if I may present our final presenter, Dr. Juwita Muhammad. Dr. Juwita is a fellow in the Economics, Trade and Regional Integration Division of ISIS Malaysia. She has previously worked at the Asia Desk, OECD in Paris, at ISIS Malaysia. Prior to that, the Asian Development Bank Institute and Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan. She holds a PhD in International Studies from Waseda University in Japan, and her research focused on the impact of trade liberalization on wage inequality between skilled and unskilled workers in Malaysia. She obtained a master's degree in economics from Shiga University, Japan, and her bachelor's degree in business administration from University Kebangsaan Malaysia, or National University of Malaysia in Malaysia. Her research interests include trade, regional integration, protectionism, wage inequality, and the informal sector. Dr. Juwita will be presenting on digitalization and the digital economy in Malaysia. Dr. Juwita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Terence, for that kind introduction. Hello, everybody. I will be looking at new sources of growth in Malaysia, ASEAN, and beyond, focusing more on the digital economy and digital trade in the post-pandemic background. Before we move forward, let me try to clarify the definitions of the digital economy, digital trade, and also digitalization. All of these jargons are sometimes used interchangeably, so let me try to explain what they all mean so that a more fruitful discussion can take place later on. So what is the digital economy and why is it so important for a developing country like Malaysia? So in general, digital economy actually encompasses the whole ICT sector and the e-commerce sector. So nevertheless, the components may differ by country. As was highlighted by the World Bank, given Malaysia's broader definition of the digital economy compared to other OECD countries. So in Malaysia, the ICT sector actually includes ICT wholesale and also retail trade, content and media activities, and other miscellaneous ICT services, in addition to all of the industries that was covered by the OECD definition. So on the ground today, Malaysia has a significantly large ICT manufacturing and telecommunication sectors, which represents a sizable proportion of value added in our digital economy. So let's move on to digital trade. And why is it seen as a savior in such trying times as we are undergoing now? So again, even the OECD has highlighted that there is no specific definition of digital trade. So in a nutshell, digital trade includes all activities that are digitally enabled, transaction of trade in goods and also services that is delivered physically and digitally. So these transactions can include consumers, firms, as well as government parties. To be more specific, even though all types of digital trade are made possible by using digital technologies or digital platforms, not all forms of digital trade is delivered digitally. So as an example here in Malaysia, digital trade can involve digitally enabled platform, but physically delivered trades in goods and services. So this can be a purchase, the purchase of a book through Kinokuniya online app, or booking a stay at an Airbnb in an apartment in the city amidst our MCO or lockdown 3.0. So here we can see that digitalization is therefore defined as the use of digital technologies to change a business model and provide new revenue and value producing opportunities. So again, it is the process of moving to a digital business. So here is why automation is an important component of digitalization. In Malaysia as well, when we talk about digitalization, we talk about automation hand in hand. So again, this is why digitalization needs to come hand in hand with automation in a given firm. So let me just highlight to you the benefits and challenges faced by MSMEs in particular when it comes to digitalization. So according to our SME Corp data of 2019, again, it was found that almost 99% of business establishments, amounting to about 900,000 establishments in Malaysia, are made up of actually MSMEs. So the micro enterprise specifically are made up, the micro enterprises makes up about 77% of the total MSME community here in Malaysia. So if we break it down even further, the medium-sized enterprises only makes up 2.3% of the whole share of the total MSMEs. So the concentration of MSMEs here in Malaysia are mainly in the services sector, which amounts to almost 90% of total MSMEs. And again, we found that in 2018, way before the pandemic, 66% of our workforce in Malaysia are actually employed by SMEs. So the contribution of SMEs is equal to ringgit Malaysia 522 billion ringgit to the GDP, and this is equivalent to almost 40% of the GDP. So this is quite a sizable chunk, as you can see. So out of all of the 900,000 MSMEs establishments, we see that the state of Selangor actually attracted the most MSMEs, with almost 20% of the total MSMEs located in Selangor. This is followed by other states like Kuala Lumpur, Perak and Pulau Pinang with about 15%, 8%, and also 7% respectively. And when we look at our East Malaysia states, like Sabah and Sarawak, they attract 6.7% and 6.2% of total MSMEs. But what is lacking in terms of attraction of MSMEs are actually in states of Kelantan, Terengganu, and Pahang in our East Coast, with only recorded total record of MSMEs of about 5%, 3%, and 4% from the total MSMEs in Malaysia. So again, we found that also in 2018, from a total of 1,529 formal SMEs who participated in the survey, they highlighted that 83% of SMEs actually used ICT technology or ICT platforms in their daily business operations. 22 of them have their own websites, and 14% operate online stores. So again, here the survey highlights how SMEs are using other financial services as well, which includes insurance, takaful, and also e-payments. We saw that more than 50% of the respondents actually have insurance or takaful products, although this was less prevalent among our micro entrepreneurs. So it was the SMEs mainly who made electronic payments online, but again, when receiving cash, or receiving payment, they would prefer it to be off the books or just through cash transfers instead of on payments made on these online platforms. So again, with financial services going online, it has benefited both the MSMEs and also individual users. We saw that the percentage of population who are above 15 years old, who own accounts at financial institutions or mobile money service providers have increased actually from 66% in 2011, and it has increased to 85% in 2017. So if we delve deeper into this data, we also find that the female subgroup has actually increased their own account ownership share by almost 20% in less than 9 years. So let me also highlight the situation on the digital economy in Malaysia. So again, between 2010, 2016, the Malaysian digital economy actually grew by about 9% annually in value-added terms. If this steady growth continues, it was projected before the pandemic that by last year, the digital economy would make up around 20% of the country's GDP, as e-commerce alone is expected to exceed 110 billion ringgit, making up nearly 40% of the digital economy in 2020. So this was cited by the World Bank. So to highlight the importance of the digital economy and the digital trade in the midst of recovering from the pandemic, let me just highlight to you on Malaysia's budget for this year, 2021. As we can see that there was a generous allocation towards promoting digitalization and automation across different sectors of MSME. So it's not just targeted to one specific sector. So under the digital adoption objective, there was an allocation of around 150 million ringgit in grants with relaxed conditions for MSMEs and startups in particular. An additional 150 million ringgit was also distributed to encourage the adoption of e-commerce through, again, training, sales assistance, and also digital equipments. And then when we talk about automation as well, and also upskilling, another 230 million ringgit was also allocated to financing SMEs, especially for working capital and also upgrading of their existing automation systems. So again, given the nature of our MSME community and its challenges in securing financing, especially during the pandemic for digital upgrading and adoption, the allocation is very much in line with the growing importance of digital economy in Malaysia. So additionally, digital trade has been essential in maintaining and creating employment and also livelihood, especially during the previous lockdowns. Support is very much needed for the MSME community through giving them opportunities to participate. And this can only be done if they're equipped with proper knowledge, proper infrastructure, and tools in the immediate term. So let me just highlight the challenges faced by MSMEs, not just in financing, but in terms of adoption. So despite its benefits, there are challenges faced in terms of digitalization. It was found that overall businesses in Malaysia do not actually adopt digital technologies as readily anticipated by the government. Digital adoption by Malaysian businesses still lag behind the global average. Only 29% of businesses have a web presence in Malaysia, while only 5% of businesses are engaged in e-commerce. But then again, this is the data from 2015. It may have increased considerably last year. So again, when we look at a report in 2019, 9 out of 10 enterprises in Malaysia have outlined their digital strategies for the medium term, but only 40% have not done so, and they're still exploring their options. On that point, the World Bank report also highlighted that Malaysia had fewer businesses with websites, and even fewer have secured servers than per capita income would have predicted if we were to compare to other countries as our peers. So the adoption of technology, the nature of adoption is also very different in Malaysia. It was observed that SMEs digitalized primarily in fundamental and simple technologies and not in more complex and sophisticated digital solutions, unfortunately. And then again, this has caused them to lag behind larger firms, which are in Malaysia, who have more capital to invest in more, again, complex technologies and also systems. So again, there are many, many challenges despite the government's efforts to propel the sector to move forward, recovering from the pandemic. So let me try to move on to ASEAN, and we can look at policy recommendations for the region and also beyond. So again, ASEAN has also, we have seen that the new normal that was accompanied by the outbreak actually revolutionized purchasing habits and expectations. So we found that in ASEAN especially, by turning to the digital world to stay connected, the youth especially have emerged as more creative, they're more skilled, and they're more readily able to grasp opportunities again during the pandemic. Despite the difficulties emerging due to poor internet connectivity in some areas, the picture that emerged in ASEAN was that of digital transformation that has created a tech-savvy generation. So here it was reported that 9 out of 10 of youngsters said that they had increased their use of at least one digital tool during the pandemic, while less than half had picked up at least one new digital tool after the onset of the pandemic. So it's the same in Malaysia. Young people in ASEAN have utilized online shopping, food delivery services, e-banking, and e-wallet apps in again trying to continue life normally post-pandemic. So let me go on to some of the policy recommendations that we can think about moving forward in a region. So this could be with ASEAN members, but it can also be with APEC members and also beyond APEC members. So again, we need to enhance the digital infrastructure building and also bridge digital divide. We need to actually emphasize capacity building between member countries and also share best practices. Malaysia can learn a lot from Taiwan and its success stories. For Malaysia in particular and other countries in ASEAN specifically, there is a lack of skilled workers that can support the growth of the digital economy. And another point to highlight that I would like to highlight is the entry to digital trade zones. These entry to digital trade zones should be made seamlessly so that MSMEs, local MSMEs can take part of a bigger global value chain. And the last one would be on, again, our first speaker is a lawyer, so I feel that when we go ahead with for other new mega free trade agreements, we need to be able to see that competition law and also laws regarding digital trade, they need to be adjusted and adapted so that a more strong ecosystem when we talk about digital economy can flourish in the long run. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Chuita, for a very comprehensive presentation. Won't try to summarize that, but touch on many points, and especially your last point on having a more comprehensive agreement, especially to address continuing unequal spread of opportunities in digitalization is especially important. Now, let me turn this over to Mr. Haris Zainul, who will be carrying out the Q&A session. Mr. Haris, floor is yours.
Thank you, Terence. Thank you, distinguished speakers, for the insightful presentations, and also our honored guests for posing the questions in the Q&A box, right? Before we kick things off with the Q&A session, let me just recap the housekeeping rules that Terence kindly provided earlier. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box on the Zoom function rather than the chat, because sometimes it gets lost among all the messages there. Alternatively, if you feel like you want to pose your questions verbally, please use the raise hand function and we'll call upon you when we have the time. But to kick things off, we have a question from Salsa Bila asking, what are the economic benefits to Malaysia and Taiwan if Taiwan were to join the CPTPP? And I think this should be more relevant to our Taiwanese speakers today. And can I get some thoughts on that? And if Dr. Juita would like to chip in as well, please feel free.
请帮他按举手。Hi, can we share our comments on these questions?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. This is Charles from CTPECC, Taiwan, and I would like to share my personal opinion about this first question. And I would like to focus on what the benefit that Malaysia will get if Taiwan have the opportunity to join the CPTPP. First of all, according to our quantitative model, we believe that the lawmakers in Malaysia is examining the agreement, and once they decided that Malaysia to sign to approve this agreement, the Malaysian GDP will grow for 1% more after they ratify this agreement. And if Taiwan have the chance to join, then the Malaysian GDP will have another 0.15% gain due to the expansion of the trade and investment between the two countries. That's the general picture. And I would like to refer to something more specific and even more crucial for the economy of Malaysia and Taiwan. That is that after the pandemic, we can foresee that something has to happen, and in fact it is happening. Is that we have to restructure our regional supply chain so that we can come back later soon in a more robust and resilient way to produce all the goods and services we need from each other. And to achieve this goal, we might need a more general and stable legal framework to make it happen. So I mean that, for example, if just like some of our presenters shows that, if, for example, if we would like to establish partnership between our digital health sectors, we might need a more friendly legal framework to promote trade and investment in the health sector of the two countries. And the CPTPP could be a very good carrier to make it happen. Okay, so I mean, in the interest of restructuring the supply chains and make it more resilient after the pandemic, we see that Taiwan's participation in the CPTPP could benefit both Malaysia and Taiwan. And the other thing is that I learned from Dr. Juita that I think both Malaysia and Taiwan are very interested to introduce more and more of our SMEs into the regional or global value chain after the pandemic. And this cannot be achieved if we have a very stable and the legal general framework to allow the SME to join. And when we talk about global or regional value chain, it means that a lot of actors will join the chain in theory, and it can't be the revenue issue can't be properly addressed if we just do some case-by-case efforts. We need a general and a stable legal framework in the region so that more and more SMEs will be able to join. So I think it's our common interest to have this legal framework between Malaysia and Taiwan so that we can bring our SMEs to join the global and regional supply chain. That's the final point I would like to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Charles, for the insightful comment. Also appreciate how you highlighted not only the economic benefits to Taiwan if Taiwan were to join the CPTPP, but also the benefits to Malaysia. It seems from my point of view as a non-economist, because I read law as well, Dr. Shi, so you're not the only one here with an economics background. It seems clear to my layperson understanding that the benefits of joining the CPTPP is quite clear, but as we know, Malaysia has not ratified it. So perhaps if I can call upon Dr. Juita to share thoughts and why is that so?
That's a very loaded question right there, Harris. Thank you for posing that question to me. But let me try to answer the earlier question on FTAs in general. So Malaysia is a small open economy. We're always looking for avenues for further cooperation, especially in terms of trade and investments. So again, when it comes to any form of membership, our main goal is to have a bigger sized market outside of Malaysia. And this is why Malaysia is now a member of ASEAN, a signatory, and also another member of RCEP. And hopefully we will be ratifying the CPTPP in a few years' time. So for Malaysia, again, as a small open economy, we are always seeking out for bigger markets outside of the country. So the more, the better, the bigger, the better for Malaysia at least. When it comes to CPTPP and the ratification of the CPTPP, I think it's a bit stalled now. The momentum has evaporated, especially after the 2-year window of ratification. And we see that our counterparts like Vietnam and other countries in Latin America, they have pushed forward with the ratification of CTPPP, and they have actually benefited from their membership. They have bigger access to markets outside of their own countries. They have further collaboration or cooperation, not only on trade-related chapters, but also non-traditional trade chapters like the environment chapter, as was mentioned by our speaker just now, on labor specifically, and again on ISDS. So again, for Malaysia to ratify the CPTPP, many more laws need to be amended, many more laws need to be adopted on the ground. And because of the pandemic, unfortunately, I think this is not such an urgent matter, especially when the number of cases are rising to more than 3,000 cases now, and we're in the midst of the third lockdown in a period of just more than 1 year. So with all of these externalities, ratification process of CPTPP is paused, if I may say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Juwita. Okay, let's move on a bit. We have a question to Miss Melody saying that telemedicine has proved to be attractive during this pandemic because people are not able to move about and meet doctors physically. How do you foresee the uptake rates for telemedicine post-pandemic when people are able to meet physically once again?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. And I think the way that people see doctors may be changed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the asking I just introduced, the case, provides easier and more convenient way to meet doctors. Patients would feel at ease to receive physicians' recommendations at home without going to hospitals. And I think the case of asking, there are mostly foreign patients to meet doctors in Taiwan online. So I think telemedicine will be the future trend of people to go to see the doctors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Melody, for the short answer. Does any of the other speakers want to chip in on the trends for telemedicine? If not, then we can move on to the other questions that we have. No? Okay, cool. Let's move on. We have a question for Dr. Shi from anonymous attendee, I'm not sure who this person is, saying that Are there ways in which we could upgrade the environmental provisions in CPTPP later on? And following that, how can we have high quality environmental protections whilst ensuring that lesser developed countries within the region, within the agreement, have space for their own economic development?
Okay, thank you for moderator. I'm glad that we're on the same, discipline. So thanks a lot for this question. The first part of the question addresses the possibility of upgrading environmental provisions in the CPTPP later. Personally, I would think that the possibility is there, but the launch of renegotiation under CPTPP is not legally viable. If we take a comparison to WTO, WTO has a function of launching negotiation launching negotiations to improve not only market access, but also rules on non-tariff barriers and other relevant legal provisions. So under the WTO, there is a negotiation function for the institutions. But in the CPTPP, we do not foresee such type of ongoing negotiation. Also, in the sense that to revise a particular tax provision might take a lot of efforts. So especially, I would say that within a short term, it's not that easy to upgrade the environmental chapters in the CPTPP. So that's the first bit of the question. Regarding the second part of the question to be dealt with, whether CPTPP can provide a high quality environmental protection in particular, and in the same time accommodating LDC's space for economic development. Well, from my presentations, the environmental chapter, in particular the articles 20.15 that I mentioned, as well as the preamble of the CPTPP, they do pay attention to the different domestic capacities and domestic needs of different parties. So I would say that, first of all, CPTPP would have the space for different parties to pursue their own economic development as well as other public policies area. But secondly, from my own observations, for LDC countries to join a FTA, well, especially in what we call a new FTA, it would help them with having access to affordable climate change, not only climate change, but green goods and technologies, so that LDCs can develop their own domestic economy while paying attention to sustainability and low carbon issues. That was my answer. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shi. Since we're on the topic of CPTPP, right? It's not really my focus area, but may I just ask, right? Because when you do the readings on CPTPP and the readings around the text, right, a lot of issues seem to be surrounding the ISDS provisions and how allegedly, governments, the decisions made by governments could be liable to, dispute, before international court, and this apparently affects sovereignty, etc., etc. I'm not sure whether this is an area that you looked at specifically, Dr. Shi, but I was just wondering whether you could elaborate a bit more on that from your perspective.
Well, investment, well, I don't do a lot of investment law, but ISDS is a very controversial issue nowadays. If I remember correctly, Malaysia Malaysia has some conservation view. Well, not conservation, conservative. I'm sorry. It's quite conservative in adopting ISDC mechanisms, which is understandable because some of the ISDS mechanisms have, or even some of the investment arbitration cases actually are perceived as depriving host countries the policy space to improve or to enhance their public policy related legislations. We do see that in under the NAFTA framework, and nowadays especially in the ECT on the European Energy Charter treaties, where when government adopted a more ambitious renewable energy policies, and the foreign investors came in and challenged these policies to, for example, to affect their investment scheme. So I think Malaysia has a reservation on ISDS under the CPTPP, but I believe that in every FTA where investment and trade relations is liberalized, there must be some mechanism to solve disputes between investor as well as host countries, whether they are built in the domestic legal framework or whether they are contained in various forms, because sometimes the ISDS is not the only available forum for solving disputes between investors and host countries. So I think for every country that tries to attract foreign investment, as well as helping their own companies to invest in the foreign countries and to safeguard their policies, they have to make their own decisions on whether in the FTA negotiations they would what kind of disputes settlement mechanisms between foreign investors and the host countries are needed for their own domestic needs. I hope I answered some of your queries.
Yeah, you did, Dr. Shi. Thank you very much for the explanation. I have a question for Dr. Juwita. How can regional or international cooperation or FTAs help small businesses or SMEs digitalize or grow? What are some avenues or mechanisms to do so within regional cooperation frameworks or within existing FTA frameworks?
Thank you, Haris, for that question. In ASEAN in particular, and also in APEC, recently member countries have identified the importance of MSMEs in growing local business, in growing the local economy, but also there is an important and also an urgent need to include them in the global value chains. And again, here I'm talking about the regional cooperation framework of ASEAN and also APEC. So with this said, within ASEAN and within APEC, there are certain working groups that help to boost MSMEs participation within these given frameworks. And with that said, I think last year with the renewal of the Bogo goals, one of the main agenda already committed by member countries is actually to grow the MSMEs through empowering them with digitalization tools and also with automation, so that they can be able to participate in the digital economy and digital trade activities as a whole, not just post-pandemic, but looking ahead in the next 5 to 10 years. I hope that helps answer the question to a certain extent. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Juwita. We have another question for Dr. Shi from Dr. Helena, who asks that, are there areas for possible environmental/low carbon cooperation between Malaysia and Taiwan?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. Well, from my presentation earlier, one area of possible cooperation will probably be on renewable energies, because I believe that this is an area where both countries are trying to used as both an economic development policies as well as an environmental policies. So for example, Malaysia is the second biggest palm oil producers in the world, and the biofuel, a palm oil-based biofuel is also one of the targeted area of policy development in Malaysia. On the Taiwanese side, we are trying to build a robust renewable energy industry. So I believe that especially from, well, maybe, for example, from the renewable energy perspective, both countries are pursuing different specific areas of renewable energy sources development, and at the same time building their own supply chain and their own industrial capacity. Since they are not in a competition in this area, so I believe there are a lot of complementarities between Taiwan and Malaysia in jointly pursuing the development of renewable energy, different sources of renewable energy. That's one of the areas that I can think of at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shi. I have a question for Ms. Melody. Speaking about Taiwan's digital health initiatives and response to COVID-19, which is quite amazing if I may add, how can Taiwan help other less developed countries in the region upgrade and improve their own healthcare capacities, especially on the digital front?
I think now we have a APEC Digital Health Sub-Working Group in under the APEC structure, and the purpose of this digital health sub-working group is to share the experiences and best practices from APEC economies about their digital health measures to combat COVID-19. So I think we can have I think we need APEC economy support, and we will do more cooperations in this sub-working group. And after that, because the sub-working group may be have sunset clause, so maybe we will have another project. It's about APEC Digital Health Alliance, and which will support the purpose of the sub-working group to continue enhance the cooperation between APEC economies regarding the digital health cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Melody. Before I pass the floor back to Terence and we start wrapping up, I have one last question from Ainun, asking, I think this is for Dr. Shi, asking for views on Taiwan's green recovery plan to resume its climate reduction commitments, such as the emission target set in 2015. Are there any changes in terms of priorities, especially post-COVID outbreak? Thank you.
The current policy goals of deploying more renewable energy sources in Taiwan remains the same. And as if I catch the question correctly, they are also the question also addresses whether Taiwan will change its long-term greenhouse gas mitigation objective. Am I correct? Yeah. We are in the process of revising our Greenhouse Gas Management and Reduction Act. And since several Asian countries, especially Japan, Korea, has made like what we call a zero pledge where these two governments plans to have their greenhouse gas emissions down to zero in 2050. So the current Taiwanese government is also under pressure both internationally and domestically to consider whether we should upgrade our greenhouse gas reduction objective. And one pressing international pressure is the adoption of a carbon border adjustment measure from the EU. So Taiwan is in the process of considering changing the greenhouse gas mitigation objective, but it is still under discussion, and a lot of impact assessment would have to be needed. That's the brief answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Shi. I think with that, we are done with the questions that we have. So before I pass the floor back to Terence, I just wanted to say thank you to all these panelists for entertaining the questions that I personally had and also that came from the attendees. And with that, Terence, over to you.
Thanks so much, Haris, and thank you all once again, speakers and participants, for a very interesting Q&A session. Before we end, I would just like to give the opportunity for all of our panelists to have any last words or comments, maybe about 2 minutes each. And perhaps let's go in reverse order this time. So let me pass it to Dr. Juita. If you have any last words or comments, please.
Thank you, Terence. My last message would be on barriers to entry to global value chains. So in the specifically for the MSMEs. So in the future, as we see, mega trade deals will be inked, and this would be, again, these trade agreements will cover traditional trade chapters and non-traditional trade chapters. And as we see from RCEP and from CPTPP, there is a clause, especially, or provisions on e-commerce and the digital economy. So again, in the future, when we go forward with regional cooperation, we will not run very far from inking digital trade zones as well. So with this, I would like to highlight that barriers to entry to these digital trade zones to global value chains for MSMEs, actually, we need to examine those barriers so that it is inclusive for smaller firms to take part. And here is where there was some complaints from local MSMEs saying that they were not really able to take part in the Alibaba digital free trade zone, which was just established a couple of years ago. And even though MITI aims to have such a cooperation through this platform using such an infrastructure that can propel the growth of e-commerce from 11 to about 20% in just a couple of years. Such platforms, when used collectively and also widely, it can actually provide local MSMEs with more opportunities. And again, what I said before, a bigger market outside of Malaysia. So not only just in emergency times, but also in normal times. But here is where there were reports that MSMEs in Malaysia were not able to participate on this platform, and they are left marginalized. So going forward, we need to examine what these barriers are and to ensure that MSMEs can be included in such a global framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Juita. And now, can I pass it to Ms. Melody Chen for any last words or comments?
Thank you, moderator. I think digital health is the goal that Taiwan would promote in APEC. And we have lots of experiences of using technology tools to combat COVID-19. So we would be very glad to share our experiences and would cooperate with Malaysia and other APEC economies to these digital health related issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen and Dr. Shi.
Thank you, moderator. Well, I think from today's discussion, I would say that trade agreement seems to be used as a carrier to pursue different public policy goals. Some free traders are against that, but I think it is actually not a bad strategy in the sense that trade is really a good tool to be used for many policies too. So, for example, WTO also has a new negotiation on e-commerce as well as a work program on MSME. So I believe that different policies should take other policy goals into consideration. That means every public policies, agencies that are responsible for different policies should actually really cooperate and talk with each other in pursuing their respective agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shi. And before we finish, Mr. Herizal Hazri, any final words or maybe a comment from you as well? Please.
Thank you, Terence, and thank you everyone, especially the speakers. Really, I think, as we know that this is the second, session that we're having, and both sessions have been really excellent. I think we have had, amazing questions from the participants as well as, equally excellent presentations. I think, from on behalf of ISIS, we see this as a great opportunity to continue to exchange our ideas, and really moving forward, thinking about, what can we do together to plan for a deliverable, maybe a strategic sort of program or approach that we can both try and push, our respective governments to achieve the outcomes that we have been talking about. At the end of the day, I believe that this is not just about Taiwan, it is not just about Malaysia, but really this is about moving forward together for a greater good. And thank you very much again. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone, and I hope that we can do this more and come up with tangible, approaches or plans in the near future. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's proceedings, and I sincerely hope that our session today has been beneficial for all our participants. A note of thanks to our partner, the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, TECO in Malaysia, for supporting this webinar. Please be informed that we will have an upcoming webinar on 10th May titled Healthcare Resilience, Malaysia into the Pandemic, Tried and Tested. So do register as soon as you can. And just one last thing before we close, I would like to kindly request that all participants turn on their cameras for a brief moment so that we can take another group photo. One, two, three. Okay. Thank you and have a great day ahead, everyone.